In this video tutorial, I'm going to go over the use of pivot tables. Pivot tables to me are one of the most powerful tools that you can use within Excel for analyzing data. So let's get to it. First, I'm going to highlight all of this data, although let me explain also what this data is. This particular data is a month by month summary of product sales. So as I go from left to right, in maybe row 3 in 2007 in March in a store called South, there's north, south, east, west. There is a category called ice cream sales, or ice cream, of which there are multiple products, and you can see how many units were sold and what the total amount was that was brought in associated with that total of units. And so there are different months and different years in this data set, and there's variety among these items. And so one of the things that is useful is to slice and dice this data to try and figure out, well, how is a particular product doing in a given month, in a given year, over a period of time? How does it compare to others? How does one store compare to another? These are the types of comparisons you can do in pivot tables very quickly. So I highlight the data, and then I go to the Insert tab and click on Pivot Table, and I will let it take its defaults and go to a new worksheet. Okay, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on Group here. Well, first let me explain the interface. Over here on the right hand side we have a list of columns from our original sheet. So here's our original columns with headers on them, and here are those same columns here. And so the first thing I'll do is I'll click on Group, which is, if you recall, is the list of categories here. Pivot tables summarize data, so watch what happens when I click on this. It puts that information down here under rows, and it gives me a listing, not of hundreds of different instances of this, which there certainly are, but it gives me only the unique items that are in that column of data. I can, instead of clicking that checkbox, I can alternatively drag it there, or I can, instead of dragging it there, I can drag it there. So I can get my items listed from left to right or top to bottom. Typically, we're going to take our categorical type items, our items, data that has regular words in it that we would speak. We're typically going to take that type of information and put it into the rows or columns area. And then things which are numeric, in this case we have units and revenue, that's what we typically drag and drop into values. So if I were to drag over here units, I can see it by default creates the sum of units, and very nicely here, not only does it give me the grand total of all the units that were sold in the data set, but it breaks it out across the categorical items I put here for rows. I can move that over and it'll display it differently, but it'll be the exact same data. Now, although the values area tends to accept numerical items, you can also put in categorical items or named items in there. So let's just drop group in there and watch what happens. Because it's words, it gives us a count. And the way that I'm able to interpret this is the grand total is 922, which means that there are actually 922 rows in this range of data. But those rows are broken out in terms of 229 of them contain cereal, 233 contain fruit, etc. Now right now the data that we're looking at is highly aggregated, and so we can get it in greater specificity if we'd like. And one of the cool things about pivot tables is we can kind of nest our categories of information that we care about. We know that group is a super category of product, and so if I take product and I drop it down here, I can see now that under the category called or group called cereal, or anyway the category called group, there is an item called cereal and then a list of products here for that are associated with it, and for the things associated with fruit, there are the things associated with that. So if I were to jump over to the data set, I see things like milk is a product grouping, and then the actual product type is low fat. So we can see that here. Here's the milk super category and low fat as one of the items there. And so I can now see the count that's associated with those things. So maybe originally I might have been wondering what my sales of milk was. Well, I can drill down to that and see maybe not only the category, but maybe also a particular type of milk within that category. In the values area, we can put in not only an item like revenue, but we can put in multiple instances of it and watch what happens. So initially I do it with just and it does some, but maybe I want to know something else. So I can drop down another one and it'll create an identical column, but I can click this little arrow here, go to value field settings, and I can say, hey, I actually want the average of revenue for the Cheerios product. And furthermore, maybe I also want to know what's the minimum revenue I received for Cheerios or anything else. And furthermore, maybe I want to know the maximum on any given row of data for Cheerios that were sold. And furthermore, maybe I'd also like to know what's the spread of this data. So to get a feel for that, I can go over to standard deviation. All right, now one of the things that one of the things that's I'd like to do now is to fix the format of this, because this is there's a lot of decimal points there, and that's kind of ugly. So one thing I can do to fix that is I can click this little drop down arrow there, click value field settings, and instead of clicking on one of the items there, I can click on number format and change it to format number, and I can have 0 numbers after the decimal place or 2, whatever I'd like. But by doing that and clicking OK, it cleans up that column of data for me. Another thing that I might find a little bit concerning is that there's a lot of words in the column there. So let's go over maybe to this first thing with revenue. It says sum of revenue. Maybe that's a little much. I can click on that column heading and backspace a bunch, and now I've changed that. And for this one, similarly, I can change that one to just average. Alright, that's not the only way I can do it. I can also go over here and click on this drop down arrow, value field settings, and change the column header there as well. To get rid of the columns of data that I'm not interested in anymore, I can drag these things out of this area. And I'd like to demonstrate something else right now, which is the use of a slicer. So I can click on this item here. There are actually a couple different areas from which I can get to the insert slicer option, but I just happen to grab the one that was up there right now. I'm going to add product here, and this gives me a visual way to filter my data. So maybe I just want to see apples, and it shows me the parent category for it and that particular product. Or maybe apples and cherries if I hold down the select button. The next thing I'd like to do is to get rid of this entirely. So I can just click on that box and delete it. I'm also going to get rid of this group category and point out that if I needed to, I could sort the data that's available. So this one looks like it's already sorted, but if it weren't, or if I needed it sorted differently, I could change the order of this. I recently demonstrated how you could use a slicer to change the look and feel of things, rather to filter the data. Another way to filter the data rather than using an insert slicer option would be to drag the thing that you want to filter based on and put that into this filters area. So again, I could either use a slicer and put that on the page. In this case I'm going to use group, or I could just do it here. So maybe I just want to see the products within the cereal category or the products within the milk category. I know I've hit a lot of things already. I'm going to do just a couple more. Let me get rid of this filter here and just do something as it relates to formatting. I can go over to this design tab and add some additional options, which makes it look nicer, and then I can mouse over some of these options to show and demonstrate that there are different coloring options for displaying the data that might appeal to you, particularly if you're doing a presentation to someone else and you think this will make your presentation look more professional. Also related to formatting, if you're so inclined, you can do conditional formatting within the columns of data here to highlight, for example, things that are high or low, or the top 10 items or the bottom 5 items, just traditional things that you would do within there. The last thing I'd like to do is demonstrate the use of a pivot chart. So I will click on this and I will select a line chart. Well, actually, let me modify what's going to be in this first of all. For this, I'm going to use year in the rows, and I'll put units in the values, and I will put group in the columns, and then I will select pivot chart and I'll select a line chart. And although it's not terribly exciting at this point, it does show in any given year what the sales of a particular product category is that I have listed out on the right hand side. So we can see that ice cream was relatively flat. Maybe this blue or purple one, it started off kind of high and went down in 2006 and then recovered again in 2007. And I can do things like filtering to see just the things that I want there. And if I were to, as I continue to change things related to my pivot table, my chart would update and change as well, which is a nice handy feature. There are a lot of other things that you can do with pivot tables. I encourage you to look this up and research it on your own.